Here's something truly remarkable. As AI floods the internet with cheap automated content, the most sought-after jobs in tech aren't in code, they're in storytelling. Netflix, Microsoft, Adobe, even AI companies like Anthropic are hiring chief storytellers at salaries reaching $775,000 a year. Why? Because in a world drowning in slopaganda, human stories are the currency that actually matters. We'll tell you why that story is so important for communicators coming right up on For Immediate Release. Another fine podcast from the FIR Podcast Network.
This is For Immediate Release, the podcast for communicators.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to For Immediate Release. This is episode 501. I'm Neville Hobson.
And I'm Shel Holtz. And here's some good news for communicators. Artificial intelligence isn't replacing us, it's amplifying the value of communication itself, especially storytelling and strategic writing. If you've been feeling that AI spells doom for writers and communicators, the labor market is telling a very different story. Let's start with something concrete. The hottest jobs in tech right now aren't about writing code or managing data. They're about telling clear, compelling human stories. Recent hiring trends show that giants like Netflix, Microsoft, Adobe, Anthropic, and OpenAI are aggressively expanding communications and storytelling teams, with roles offering from six figures up to as much as $775,000 a year for senior leadership positions without any requirement to write a line of code. Why? Because AI has flooded the internet with cheap automated output, what some observers are calling slopaganda. I love this word, slopaganda. Hadn't heard it before I read that article, but millions of words get generated every minute. Most of it lacks clarity, insight, context, and meaning, exactly the things that real communicators deliver. Companies are recognizing that the ability to cut through that noise with strategic narrative creates trust, authority, and differentiation in the market. Even the AI labs themselves, including OpenAI and Anthropic, are willing to pay top dollar for storytellers. One analysis said that nearly $400,000 compensation packages are being posted specifically for storytelling and communications roles at these firms, exactly because humans excel at crafting nuanced messages that machines simply can't. So here's the underlying shift communicators need to understand. AI automates tasks, but meaning-making remains deeply human. Machines can generate text, but they don't know which stories matter, to whom, or why. And we keep hearing communicators and writers venting on LinkedIn about machines lacking judgment, empathy, context, and strategic framing. All those hallmarks of great communication, that's exactly what they're looking for. And in an age of automated noise, those abilities create value. That's a theme echoed across industry thinking. A Forbes piece on storytelling in the age of AI highlights that storytelling is one of the most powerful tools we have, and one of the most powerful tools leaders have. It helps audiences remember facts wrapped in emotion, connect data to human experience, and anchor organizational vision in something people can feel and act on. Another Forbes analysis argues that storytelling isn't just about communication, it's also a career pathway. When individuals and organizations tell clear stories about evolving roles, skills, development, and future opportunities, they make the future feel navigable rather than threatening. This matters for internal communication, too. HR and people leaders are increasingly using narrative to frame change and build resilience. When employees feel adrift, and amid talk of AI disruption, a coherent story about how the organization is evolving and where people fit in is one of the most effective ways to build trust and engagement. Even the broader hype narrative around AI's impact on jobs, including viral essays warning of sweeping automation, underscores this point. Some of the loudest voices talking about disruption are exactly those using storytelling to shape a narrative about the future. But the data so far suggests that the real impact of AI isn't mass job elimination, it's task transformation. with humans shifting into roles that emphasize strategy, creativity, judgment, and communication. Exactly the space where we storytellers thrive. So for communicators who worry that AI might make them obsolete, here's the reality. Your craft isn't threatened, it's elevated. AI makes routine work easier, but narrative leadership, strategic framing, and contextual clarity are becoming even more essential. The labor market isn't pulling back its investment in communicators, it's paying up for them, because the ability to tell a clear human story is now a competitive advantage. With the world drowning in automated content, meaning is scarce, and communicators are the ones who turn noise into narrative, confusion into clarity, and information into influence. That's not something AI replaces, it's something only humans can do well. And that's why, even in an AI era, talented communicators are irreplaceable and more valuable than ever. And by the way, if the tech companies feel the need to cut through the noise created by all that slopaganda, I got to use that word again, other industries will figure out sooner or later that they need to as well.
Listening to what you're saying there, Shel, what strikes me is how similar themes are now surfacing here in the UK. So the Times ran a piece recently about companies hiring chief storytellers, specifically to cut through what they and everyone calls AI slop. What's interesting is that it isn't framed as anti-AI, it's framed as a response to saturation. When content becomes easy and abundant, meaning becomes scarce. Recruiters are saying demand for storytelling roles has doubled in the past year, and the way they define storytelling isn't about clever copy. It's about starting with what people care about rather than what the brand wants to say. There's also a strong internal dimension, storytelling being used to align remote teams, break down silos, and create shared culture. So I'm left wondering whether this chief storyteller trend is something genuinely new, or whether we're simply rediscovering the strategic craft of communication in an AI-saturated environment. And finally, if AI makes it easier to generate content, does that mean communicators need to become curators of meaning rather than producers of material?
Interesting question. And I think that this is somewhat different. We have been telling stories, but I think you have to define what we mean by storytelling here, because we write stories that aren't really stories. It's just a term that we use as a synonym for article. I wrote a story the other day. Was it really a story, or was it a communication piece? There are so many stories that we could tell in the world of organizational communication that are really just prescriptive or a statement of fact. We're getting the news out, but we don't have a beginning, middle, and end. We certainly don't have a protagonist. We're not looking at Joseph Campbell's hero's journey and trying to figure out how to apply that to the tales that we tell. There is a guy out there, Donald Miller, who's got this thing called StoryBrand, which is fascinating, that is designed to put your customer into the story as the hero and the company as the mentor or the guide who helps the hero achieve its goal through its journey. And I really like it. And there are free tools that you can use to map all this out for your brand or your product. But it gets us away from saying, isn't this product great? Look how great it works. And tell a genuine story instead. And I think this is why narrative and story, rather than communications or public relations, are the labels that are being attached to these job descriptions that are all over LinkedIn. When I saw the story, I went and looked, and there are dozens and dozens of them. And the salaries are jaw-dropping when you consider that the typical, communication manager is making about $108,000 a year, according to one of these articles. 400,000 with all benefits, with 3 days remote work. Because I read these job descriptions, this is very encouraging for our profession. But if you're the kind of communicator out there who writes these articles that just says we have an employee assistance program, it offers the following bulleted services. You should call if you have emotional or financial problems. That's not what they're looking for. They're not looking for you. They're looking for the guy who wrote that article that I've referenced 50 times on this podcast about the employee who was divorced and depressed and started drinking and gained 100 pounds and finally called the EAP when he hit rock bottom. And they worked with him to find something that really excited him. And it turned out to be ballroom dancing. And now he's a national champion traveling around the world. He's lost more than 100 pounds. He's quit smoking and drinking, and all because of the EAP. Which of those two stories are you more likely to read? It's absolutely the story of the guy who used the EAP. People can relate to that. People don't even read the crap that says we have one and here's what it offers. So I think cutting through the noise with genuine stories that tell the tale of what the organization is trying to convey, that's what they're looking for.
So interesting. So the title, Chief Storyteller, that sounds new and fashionable, right? But when you unpack it, much of it looks like what strong communication leaders have always done. Alignment, translation, cohesion, behavioral framing opens up a richer debate, I think. Is this a genuine new C-suite function or a rebranding of strategic communication craft in an AI era? It sounds a lot like the latter to me.
Well, it sounds a lot like the latter, but I think there's a bit of the former as well, because we're talking about a transition of role. I think communicators who are employed right now want to start telling more stories if they want to keep their jobs, because if all you're doing is writing the stuff that can be written by AI just by giving it the facts and say, turn this into an article, I think you're toast. But if you can tell a genuine story that moves people, then your job is probably secure and you may be qualified to apply for one of these $400,000 a year jobs. I don't think they're going to hire the average communicator who's doing a pretty good job at their organization, even if they're at the C-suite level, if they can't put together the kind of narrative that these companies are looking for. Certainly, there are companies that are doing this, and there are communicators in those companies that are doing this, but I don't think it's most. I think most are cranking out the typical content that is just conveying the news. And I think basic journalism, the who, what, when, where, why, if I can pop that into Claude or ChatGPT or Gemini, especially if I've trained it on my writing style, which I have, by the way, on Gemini, it'll turn out a passable article that then you can edit in 15 minutes and be done. That's not what they're looking for. I think that they would argue that probably is slopaganda. And this is exactly the noise that they're looking for somebody to help them cut through.
So one of the strongest lines in the Times piece is the distinction between messaging and meaning. Traditional comm starts with what the brand wants to say, says the Times. Storytelling starts with what people care about. That's a strategic pivot, I would say. So messaging is output-driven, meaning is audience-driven. AI is good at output. Humans are better at contextual meaning. So is that how we should be looking at this, is a shift from messaging to meaning?
Oh, absolutely. I think that's exactly what we're talking about here. And the focus on the audience. And again, this is what Donald Miller's story brand, who has paid us no consideration for the reference here. It's exactly what he does. He puts the customer at the center of the company or the brand's story. And I think that's what's different. I think that's the transition or the pivot that communicators need to make. I don't think it's difficult. And if you haven't written fiction, I would suggest that you read about Joseph Campbell's hero's journey. There's a wonderful book. I can't remember the author's name, but I've read it twice, called The Writer's Journey. And he talks about, he's focused on writing fiction, but he talks about how you apply the hero's journey to things like Star Wars and The Wizard of Oz. And he has these tropes that everybody is familiar with, that he uses to explain how to write this way. And he tells you that every successful film, in particular, and novels as well, uses this formula. And I read it twice because I really had to unpack it in a way that worked in organizational communication rather than novel and film writing. But it does. It works. And then I found Donald Miller and his story brand, and I said, there it is, right there. I can fill in the boxes who is the mentor, who is the other characters that appear in this formula, and it's well worth taking a look at. And his book is worth reading as well. I'll have a link to StoryBrand in the show notes.
Yeah. So I'm just kind of going through my mind, thinking about where this conversation we're having here, and if we look at which to me makes complete sense, and the Times article and the Business Insider piece, I think support this, that the shift is definitely from messaging to meaning, something we've talked about quite a bit. The Times piece talks about the noise not being the problem. It's indistinguishable noise. And that makes sense, that kind of metaphorical phrase. That reminds me of conversations we've had before, which talks about what communicators using artificial intelligence to enhance their abilities. So I'm just trying to see where the kind of path looks ahead for this. It seems to me that AI is going to play an even more significant role in the future for communicators who are shifting from messaging to meaning. And I must admit, I don't believe that the scenario you painted earlier about the kind of, the communications person who has been doing the stuff he or she's been doing for years, that's fine. Keep doing that because there's a market for you. I don't think that's true. I think AI is the threat for those people. So if AI is good at output, according to the kind of one of the concluding points in the Times piece, humans are better at contextual meaning. That surely is then what people are looking for to pay the $500,000 or whatever it is a salary to a chief storyteller. I think there's huge confusion here, and inserting into the picture the phrase chief storyteller, where it's just a fancy job title, basically, doesn't help with this, it seems to me. But it's inevitable, I suppose, you're going to get that because, as you said, I've seen it. It's all over LinkedIn. That chief storyteller is an executive function. Yeah, but that's not the right interpretation for that, I don't believe. So it doesn't help clarify what the picture is here.
I don't know. I would be very curious to look at the org charts of the companies that are seeking these positions to see if it is separate and distinct from the public relations or communications function. We talked several weeks ago about the proposed new definition of public relations, and it goes way beyond this. I'm thinking, and I don't know this for a fact, but I'm thinking that what these companies are doing is creating a new function that will live alongside and presumably under the same umbrella as the PR or corporate communications department, which is building relationships with key stakeholders. But the storytellers are out there creating the content that's going to cut through the slop, aimed at particular audiences who are ripe for this kind of storytelling. I was about to say messaging, but it's trying to get away from messaging. And the PR department will continue to do the earnings releases and the thought leadership and the negotiations with critics and all of the stuff that PR typically does. I don't get the impression that these jobs sit in the public relations department.
No, I would say not, particularly as, for instance, one point the Times made is that there's a significant element of team building and so forth. So internal focus in organizations for this sort of roles. It's not just a public relations external function by any means. It's interesting you mentioned the definition. I published a post on my blog this morning about that, actually, looking at what the PRCA's done. It's only one professional body. I'm thinking this isn't going to fly unless everyone gets behind it. So that's a different topic than what we're talking about. But it sort of fits in there because the role of I just have a problem with this chief storyteller title, frankly, Shel. It doesn't really fit what this role actually is. And I do believe, and you've partly prompted this kind of clarity in my thinking on this, that this is about messaging. It's not about content production. That's what AI does. And the interpretation of it, the meaning and significance of it is what the human does. Now, if you can, let's say, present your skill as something in that area to an organization who's willing to pay $400,000. Again, be interested to see the job description behind that salary level. I haven't seen that. I've not actually looked, I must admit. But be interested to see how they have described the role they're willing to pay $400,000 for. So I would imagine they're absolutely swamped with applications, which is where AI comes into play. AI comes into play well to sift out all the no-hopers, basically. But it is interesting. It is very interesting. And this could be a great catalyst for the discussion about the role of the communicator in organizations in light of this development. That seems to me to be something good to happen.
I can't imagine somebody at OpenAI or Anthropic sifting through hundreds of resumes across probably
and
thousands
be doing
of
it.
resumes. They're absolutely feeding them all to AI. I'd be shocked if not. And for the record, there are also some of these positions that don't have storytelling in the title. I saw a couple that had narrative in the title instead. But I think they're all getting to this notion of telling a powerful story that evokes emotions and pulls audiences in rather than advertising or traditional marketing speak. That's what's going to cut through the, I get to say it again, slopaganda. And that'll be a 30 for this episode of For Immediate Release.